Whether you're trying to find initial traction in your business, build a seven-figure business, or lead one doing hundreds of millions a year, this one relationship determines how much time, energy, and money your next level will require. And it's going to determine if you inch along incrementally or create explosive exponential growth. And this is the relationship between your current identity and your vision. Now, I've coached thousands of founders, and this crystallized recently for me as I was having a conversation with one of my clients who run the business that does $400 million a year. And this made me really reflect, like, doesn't really matter what level you're at right now, because this pattern is going to appear at every single level. And the stuff that I'm going to tell you today is the primary constraint for him. And this is the case whether you're at six figures, seven figures, eight figures, and nine figures. The scale changes, but the power dynamic doesn't. Most people, most founders try to create the future by applying more force from the present, more effort, more strategy, more people, more content, more capital. But if your current identity remains in charge, if you're who you are in the present moment, if that's the thing that's in control, every single one of those resources is going to get filtered through the consciousness that created your current reality, which is usually a past version of yourself, right? You may grow because you're trying, you're pushing, but you're going to grow linearly with an enormous amount of friction. And the pattern that I see often is that people who are operating in this way, they build, but then they dismantle and then they rebuild. You know, people hire leaders and then they override those leaders. And then for some reason, every hire just goes through the same trajectory. Or you commit to visibility, then you pull back the moment that you feel a little bit of heat from that level of being seen. Or say you want a different kind of business, but then you spend all your time protecting the current one and reinforcing it with all your decisions. So the effort can be legit, but if your effort keeps canceling itself, you're going to keep repeating and spinning in the same present reality. Exponential growth only becomes possible when that relationship reverses, when the future stops being something that your current identity is trying to control, and it becomes a dominant force that reorganizes who you are in the present and the decisions you make, the actions you take. And of course, that's all downstream of the identity that you're operating from, the thoughts you're thinking, the beliefs you're holding, really your core frequency. Your vision holds the direction, right? Your vision sets the direction that you move towards. And ideally, your current identity becomes receptive enough to be changed by it, to be redirected. And what this requires is for you to collapse the resistance, collapse the power struggle between your past, your present, and your future. When you do this, your decisions become a lot more coherent and they become aligned towards the future reality that you want to create. The work you do right now in the present moment and in every present moment actually begins to compound, and the energy that you're using to resist the future actually becomes available to create it. So in other words, you need to be domed by your vision. And the thing to understand about vision is that most people, when they talk about vision, they teach it as a picture, something you write down, something you think about, something you visualize, something you put on a vision board next to the villa, the private jet, the six pack, and the suspiciously compliant partner who apparently never has to discuss whose turn it is to empty the dishwasher, right? The value of a vision, and this is really important to understand, is not determined by how clearly you can see it, right? The value of vision is not determined by how much you defined it, how clearly you articulated it, how prominently it sits on your wall. The value of a vision is determined by how much authority you allow it to exercise over your present identity and your present reality. Because you can have an amazing vision. It can be super clear, super sincere, and insanely ambitious, right? But your present relationship with it can still remain fundamentally conservative. You can let it inspire you. You can let it guide your strategy. You can organize a whole offsite around it and print it on these gigantic 12-foot pieces, and then make your executive team reverently nod at it beneath the bright fluorescent lights of a hotel ballroom. And you can still continue to reject anything that the vision asks of you that threatens the identity that you currently inhabit because it's really fucking uncomfortable, right? You operate at your capacity for discomfort. And that's the real issue. It's not whether you have a vision. If you're watching this, I'm assuming you do. And if you don't, that'd be a good place to start. But the thing that I want you to ask yourself is who has authority when your future vision and your current identity want different things? If your vision requires you to become more visible than your current identity finds comfortable, who wins? If it requires you to fire someone you care about or release a profitable offer because you've outgrown it, or give another person a new hire genuine authority so you can stop being the bottleneck, if it requires you to invest before the return is certain, or stop doing the work that makes you feel indispensable, like, you did something of value, who actually wins, right? If your current identity always gets the veto power, the vision is not leading you. It's just advising you. And advice is really easy to ignore. So I see three fundamental relationships between identity and vision. The first is present governed. The second is vision informed. And the third is vision dominated. These aren't stages of revenue. You can be present governed while trying to find initial traction. You can be present governed at 7 figures. You can be present governed while running a massive business. Like I coach a lot of 9-figure entrepreneurs, some doing 10 figures a year. These patterns apply at every level. The expression may change, but the relationship doesn't. So let's talk about the first one. So at the first level, the present has nearly all the authority. So you're asking, what needs to be solved today? What do I need to get done? What's going to make money immediately? What opportunities directly in front of me? What can I do with the resources and the identity that I currently have? How do I relieve the pressure that I'm feeling right now? So here you're operating on a much shorter time horizon. Most of your actions are focused on the here and now. You may have goals, you may be extremely ambitious, but there isn't a future that's sufficiently alive and authoritative enough to organize the present. And even if you have a big vision, you may not be letting it actually infiltrate and impregnate the present moment. So your attention goes wherever the pressure is greatest, right? And this leads you to be more reactive. If you're trying to find traction, that might look like, changing the offer every time someone says no to it because, you're like, oh, I gotta change this thing. And there isn't like staying power. If you're doing, multiple 6 or 7 figures, it may look like adding another revenue stream every time things slow down. And then eventually your business resembles a strip mall designed by a committee of crackheads. Just complex, it's ADD, it's fragmented, and it's a pain in the ass to actually run. And if you're operating at a much larger scale, it might look like optimizing for the next quarter while actually avoiding the innovation required for the next decade. Thinking in much longer timescales and having more of the work that's done in the present moment be for something in the future. And there can be a lot of pressure here, right? But pressure is not polarity. That's the thing that I want you to understand. Pressure is not polarity. We're looking for polarity, not pressure. So polarity requires two differentiated poles with energy moving between them. So think like, a battery, you complete the circuit. One has, negative charge, one has positive charge. And that differential is actually what makes the electricity flow. And at this level, level 1, there's only the gravity of the present. So your present circumstances reinforce your current identity. Your current identity makes the decisions, and those decisions reproduce the present circumstances. And, you keep doing this and you call the result your future. Now in level 2, your vision informed. So at this level, you have a real vision. It attracts you, it excites you, turns you on, it creates movement. Now you have 2 poles, right? The identity that you currently inhabit and the future that's trying to draw you forward. And that creates tension, desire, charge. It also creates a power struggle. So here you have the 2 parts of you that are just battling with each other and it wastes a lot of energy. So you want the vision, but your current identity still controls what the vision is allowed to ask of you. You want the leadership team, but you still need to be in control and approve every single meaningful decision. You want the category defining brand, But you want to avoid saying anything that could make 10% of the market think that, you're wrong, you have something backwards, you're not seeing something right. Or, like one of my clients, you want a media operation that reaches millions of people, but every piece of content still has to emerge directly from your nervous system, like a small, perfectly polished artisanal bowel movement, right? Like you have this perfectionistic tendency towards every single thing because you're attached to how you're perceived. For some of you, you want a business that can operate without you, but being needed is still one of the primary ways that your current identity ensures that it's valuable and it's safe. Or, you want to build the platform, but you keep pouring the foundation for another product that optimizes for immediate cash. So a way to think about this is that, you want the giant mansion, the grand estate, but you actually keep building bedrooms. So this is where scarcity becomes extremely sophisticated. So a good way to think about the frequency of scarcity and the frequency of abundance is in terms of timescales. So the people who are operating in the deepest level of scarcity, they're literally thinking about, this the next second or the next minute. The people who basically hold the greatest amount of abundance as an energy, as a vibration, think in generations, right? There are families on the planet who have been extremely wealthy for, hundreds of years, and they're thinking generationally. They're making decisions today that affect, 7 levels down in their lineage, right? They're thinking 4, 5, 600 years ahead. And this is really important to understand because what we want to do is we want to operate, like, to take a quick tangent, the goal, if you want to live the most exquisite life, if you want to create at the highest level, if you want to unlock your potential in business and in life, to the max, you want to operate on as long of a time scale as you possibly can. Because when you do that, and of course you need to have the financial and other kinds of sovereignty to be able to do that, because then you can be at the highest level of ease and you can feel fully, aroused and alive because you're essentially like in love with a vision that you want to bring into form. And this is kind of where I'm trying to point you to, right? Now, at this level, the scarcity that you feel, the scarcity that interferes with you getting to this place doesn't always sound like fear, right? It sounds like responsibility. It sounds like you being prudent, protecting the core, focusing on what works. And sometimes that's the right thing to do, right? Sometimes it might feel like you have to take some actions that are more present optimized versus future optimized because maybe, you have payroll to make and we need to bring some cash in. But sometimes the current identity has simply appropriated the language of good strategy to protect itself from transformation. So your psychology is incredibly sophisticated and insanely clever, and it uses these tricks to basically get the heat off itself. And in erotic terms, what this means is that you're topping from the bottom, right? You appear to be submitting to the vision while quietly controlling the entire interaction from the backseat. So you're essentially saying, I'll submit to the vision, but I'll decide what it's allowed to ask of me. The vision produces charge, but the power struggle between the present and the future consumes all the charge. And that's why you can be really successful at this level and still experience growth as disproportionately exhausting. It just takes a lot out of you, right? At this place, right, you're taking future actions from your current self, from your current identity. And a new strategy executed by the same identity often becomes the old business, basically in a more expensive costume. So what you want to do is you want to move from level 2 to level 3. So let's talk about level 3. At level 3, you're allowing your present self, your present identity, to be dominated by your future self, by your future vision. And so at the third level, this power relationship actually becomes more clear. You're giving the vision authority, and your current identity consciously chooses to yield to it. not because your current self is weak or not enough. It's quite the opposite. The identity that created your current success is very intelligent, very capable, and highly adapted to the reality that you already have, right? It's capable of creating what you're living right now. It deserves respect, but respect is not the same thing as permanent control. Because at this level, the vision holds the direction, the standard, and the larger context. Your current identity brings discernment, execution, intelligence, this understanding of present reality and the constraints, and the willingness to be transformed. So the vision may say, hey, you can no longer be at the center of every consequential decision. Your ideas need to reach 100 times more people. You know, this executive was perfect for the business you built and wrong for the business you're building, the future version of this business, or this seemingly profitable offer does not belong in the future architecture, or your relationship with time cannot hold the responsibility ahead. Your health, your boundaries, your emotional regulation, your ability to metabolize criticism must expand with your visibility. Your current identity does not blindly comply. This is not blind compliance, right? It reads reality, it thinks critically, it chooses the most intelligent way to respond. But the vision holds the command. You bring it into form. And when you allow the vision to lead you and you allow your current identity to follow, the roles actually become clear. That clarity creates really strong polarity, right? There's one part of you that's dominating, and there's another part of you that's submitting to that part of you that's in control. So at level 2, energy is consumed by the power struggle. At level 3, that same energy now becomes available for creation. Now, the thing to understand, this is not hustle culture in a leather harness, right? I'm not telling you to dominate yourself in a harsh, critical way, like, you know, the voice of David Goggins or Alex Hormozi, who's in every entrepreneur's head. So I want to be really clear about this. Being domed by your vision does not mean overriding your body, your nervous system, ignoring the reality that's right in front of you, abusing yourself in the name of ambition, or sacrificing the things you love just to make a graph go up and to the right. That's not conscious submission, that's self-abandonment. Healthy submission is chosen, right? There's choice in it. As an entrepreneur, I bet your number one value is freedom. And if you want to be successful, you have to create success in a way that maximizes choice. If you feel constrained, you're going to rebel against your own direction. So healthy submission requires trust. It requires attunement. It requires enough discernment to know what you're submitting to and if it's actually worth submitting to the thing. So your vision actually has to be your vision. It can't be something that you borrowed from someone else who has a loud voice or you see everywhere. Your vision also should not be a compensatory fantasy designed to prove your worth, win your father's approval, humiliate your high school chemistry teacher who said you won't amount to anything, or, you know, finally become someone important enough that you don't have to feel anymore the stuff that you spent your entire life avoiding. Basically, your vision needs to be clean, right? It can't be a shell designed to protect the wounds that have become a chip on your shoulder. That kind of vision will dominate you too, right? But that's just an unconscious kind of domination. And, you know, the entrepreneurs who build businesses based on those visions, they end up building a very expensive prison. And what I'm saying is that the vision that's worthy of your devotion is actually the one that calls you into greater truth, greater service, greater aliveness, greater responsibility, more of the person that you know you're capable of becoming. Basically, it's the vision that allows you to actualize into the greatest version of yourself, right? That's why I say entrepreneurship is the most perfect vehicle for enlightenment, because it's going to reveal everything, because it's a mirror. Your business is a mirror. And if you see it as one, you can actually actualize into the most evolved, whole, sovereign, and coherent version of yourself and actually, you know, become who you came here to be. So submission to that vision is not the abandonment of sovereignty. It's actually a sovereign decision about what you're willing to be governed by. You're choosing, right? You're not submitting because you're powerless. You're submitting because you've chosen this future version of yourself, this future vision, this future state more authority over your present than your past. And this is also really key if you want to create exponential growth in your business, right? If you're just trying to grow incrementally, there's easier ways to do that. And like in the last video, I told you about one of my clients a few years ago. When we started working together, he was doing 40, 50K months, and I just spent a week with him in Tahoe, and he's there for a month. These past 30 days, this is the least he's worked in his business. It's the most fun he's had. We spent a lot of our time on jet skis and grilling and all sorts of just life stuff, right? Really just enjoying life. And his business did $665,000 in this month. And that's, I think, like a 12, 13x growth in the last 2-ish years. That is illogical, right? He has 12x'd his business while working less than ever before. That kind of growth can only come from these principles that I'm sharing with you. Most founders are trying to create these non-linear levels of growth by increasing inputs, right? They're like, oh, I'm going to put in more hours. I'm going to add more employees. I'm going to build more products. I'm going to, put my stuff out on more channels. I'm going to build more software connected to more software until, the business has 14 dashboards and no one knows their head from their ass. That's not the game I want you to play, because more input doesn't always create more leverage. It actually, most cases, creates more complexity and fragmentation, more management, more directions for this energy to leak. Vision-dominated growth actually changes fundamentally the relationship between the inputs and the outputs. So first, it actually collapses unnecessary decision-making. Because when your vision has authority, you stop reopening the same questions every 3 months. Your future vision becomes the primary present-day decision filter. So basically, you're collapsing a lot of cognitive overhead. Stuff like, what are we building? What opportunities deserve our attention? What work belongs to me? What kind of brand are we willing to become? The decision space becomes smaller. This is like, Steve Jobs always wearing that black turtleneck, reducing decisions. If you look at the highest level entrepreneurs in the world, what they're constantly trying to do is reduce the amount of decisions that they make, right? They don't want their consciousness be cluttered and engaged and wasting energy on decisions that don't need to be made over and over again. So when you do this, your creative power gets more concentrated. The other thing is that this stops what I call self-canceling action. So you stop, doing the things that basically have to be undone. So, hiring someone and then not giving them the authority and the empowerment to do a good job, and then you fire them, and then you got to find the next person, or building an audience around one message, and then you change it before the market has really associated you with that thing, or, delegating something and then pulling it back the second that someone doesn't do as well as you would do, right? This is really important because you want all your energy to be as concentrated as possible, and you want it to be as aligned in the direction that it needs to be to achieve your future vision. And we want this to, like, as much as possible, eliminate all the drag, all the friction, because that's going to give you the most efficient path forward. The third piece of this is that when you operate this way, it actually allows your work to compound. So your content over time strengthens the positioning. Your positioning attracts the right customers and clients. When you serve those people, it deepens your intellectual property. Your intellectual property strengthens your products, your team, your technology, and your brand. And then the money you make creates more capacity to do the work that only you can do. And every time you run the cycle, it becomes a flywheel, and the business accumulates more intelligence, more trust, builds more assets, has more demand, and then there's also more creative capacity than you had before. That is exponential growth, right? It's not a magic, hockey stick chart because you lovingly whispered affirmations into a mirror while gently stroking a crystal. This is coherence that compounds over time. When every meaningful action belongs to the same future, your effort starts to compound instead of just accumulate. This is how you can create far more growth with a fraction of the time, energy, and resources. It's not because, the work disappears completely, but actually because the waste disappears, right? All your energy actually is going to pushing the whole thing forward. Now, there's a whole biological side to this too, right? Dopamine, which I'm sure you've heard of, is described as the molecule of reward, but its real purpose is actually far more interesting, which is wanting, pursuing, right? Mobilizing effort towards what we believe is worth chasing. So, what they found is that dopamine levels rise as the subject moves closer to a distant reward, proportional to both the size of the reward and the proximity to it. So basically, what I'm trying to tell you is that desire needs distance, right? The more desire you have, the more erotic charge you have, the more energy you have to pursue a big vision. The gap between your current identity and your future vision is actually what energizes the chase. So if you collapse the vision into something your current identity already knows how to create, you lose the charge. Basically, if your future vision is something that your current identity can, bring to form on its own, if you don't have to change, if you don't have to grow, if you don't have to expand your capacity, if you don't have to become someone different to achieve your vision, you're not going to have juice. It's too close, it's too achievable, right? So that's why you need a vision that your current self does not yet have the capacity to hold. And of course, that's going to be uncomfortable, right? Great entrepreneurs learn how to harness and hold that tension without discharging it. If you make the vision so abstract that you cannot experience yourself moving towards it, you're also going to lose juice. You're also going to lose traction. And this is why you need to define it in a way that you actually see a path to it, so it's not just fantasy. The vision needs to be far enough away to turn you on and real enough to pull you forward. That's what strong polarity gives you, right? A future that's distinct enough to generate desire and a current identity receptive enough to be moved by it. So how do you actually do this? It's not going to happen by writing more affirmations or asking your current identity to remember to read it every morning, right? Because think about it, if you've seen the movie Inception, when you're in the dream, you don't know that you're dreaming. That's why they had the totem. So the same identity that needs the reminder is actually responsible for remembering to use it. So you can't actually depend on it, right? That can help reinforce a shift, but it can't make the shift for you. So you want to start by making the vision large enough to require a different identity. Here, don't just imagine 10 times the revenue, right? Imagine 10 times the total responsibility. More customers, more visibility, more people depending on the quality of your decisions, more capital to allocate, more complexity, more scrutiny, more family responsibility, better health, right? Better relationships, more spiritual integrity, more life moving through you while you hold all of it. Now, I want you to ask yourself, who is the person capable of holding that reality without being consumed by it? How do they lead? How do they make decisions? What do they no longer need to control? How visible are they willing to become? How do they use their time? How much white space is there on their calendar? What standards do they hold? What level of uncertainty can their nervous system metabolize without collapsing into reactivity? Then let that future identity enter your present. Right? Let that version of you look at the problem that you're currently overwhelmed by, that you're currently pondering. Let that identity bring its resources to help you navigate the present moment. The identity that's capable of holding your vision may experience the complexity that's currently consuming you as almost adorably small, right? Not because the present problem doesn't exist, but your future self has a much larger capacity. Your future self is more intelligent, more wise. It has bigger standards. It's solved, problems that are 10 to 100x bigger. So your current stuff just feels like child's play. Then you want to ask the question that actually changes the power dynamic, which is, what is this vision? What is this future version of me asking me to become, release, restructure, or choose right now? What is this vision asking me to become, release, restructure, or choose right now? It's not how do I make the vision compatible with the person I already am? It's what does the vision require of me? Maybe it requires you to give, someone on your team genuine authority. Maybe it requires you to become visible enough so you actually are misunderstood by more people. Maybe it requires you to close the profitable offer that's, consuming the capacity needed to build the future version of your business. Maybe it requires you to have a difficult conversation that you've been avoiding for a while. Maybe it requires investing in infrastructure before the need becomes painful. Maybe it requires a season of athlete level discipline, recovery, boundaries, self-care, and focus, because the vision you have cannot be held by a nervous system that's trained on chaos. Then make the one decision that gives the vision material authority over your present. Submit to your vision, submit to your future self. Do it in a way that costs your current self, your current identity, control, certainty, familiarity, status, immediate revenue or some sort of gratification, or, the emotional reward of staying in control or being indispensable. The proof that your vision has authority is not that you can describe it. The proof is that it has changed what you're willing to do in the present moment. And this is not an identity shift you make just once. It's recursive. So your future identity eventually becomes your current identity, right? If you do this well, you're gonna take actions in the present moment. You're gonna think thoughts, you're gonna hold beliefs, you're gonna, show up as that future self, and eventually the current self becomes the future self. And what once felt expansive becomes normal, right? What once demanded more courage, it just becomes competence. It gets normalized because the stuff that required conscious discipline just becomes how you naturally operate. And the success created by that identity eventually reveals an even larger vision that asks you to evolve again. Because this process of growth is an infinite journey. And this is true when you're trying to find traction in the beginning. It's true when you're, at 7 figures. And it's true when you're doing $400 million a year, like some of my clients. Every level of growth produces an identity that's qualified to get to that level and maintain that level. The next vision is going to ask you to outgrow it, and desire is going to reveal that vision. The vision is going to call forth the new future identity. The future identity is going to reorganize your present. Your present will then shift to a new reality, and that reality is going to awaken a larger desire, and the whole relationship begins again. You are downed by the vision until you become the person capable of holding it, right? The goal is to always keep becoming a better steward of the greatest amount of vision that we can hold. And then the vision is going to expand, and it's going to ask you to submit again. So look at the future that you say you want. Then look at the decisions that your current identity keeps making. Where are you governed by the present? Where are you vision informed but still engaging in a power struggle? And where have you finally allowed the vision to lead, right? Someone is going to dominate your future. Either your past will dominate your present and reproduce it as the future, or your vision can reach backwards, reorganize who you are right now, and use your present life as the material from which it creates itself. Your vision does not need more admiration. It actually needs more authority. So stop asking it to accommodate the person you're in the habit of being, and submit to the person it requires you to become.